will be at the summit. You also get to meet him at the summit. And this is Liam, my good friend Liam, who goes by Space Larouche on Twitter. Hi, Liam. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. How about you, Caleb?
I'm good. I'm good. So, Liam, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience here? I know you've been kind of watched these streams for a while. I've met you. You've spoken at Schiller Institute conferences before. And we're going to kind of shoot the breeze about all kinds of different things here tonight. But why don't you introduce yourself, tell the audience about who you are, your background, kind of give them an introduction.
Great. Yeah. Well, I've been into politics since I was a young man, and I stumbled upon Caleb Maupin's videos back in 2019, I believe, and I've been a big fan of yours ever since. And one day you interviewed someone named Daniel Burke, who is a good friend of mine, a personal friend of mine now. Because of you, I met him because of the interview with you, and I've been out with the LaRouche organization, working with them, doing things with them. I just spoke at a conference last Saturday, and I spoke at a conference on the October 15th, which went very well. We had lots of great folks there, folks from all over the world doing presentations on the solutions to a lot of today's crises. So that gives you a little bit of a... Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you. Someone in the chat said hi.
Oh, yeah. People in the chat love you already. I guess we were going to talk a little bit about some of the recent events that have gone on. I know that you probably have some thoughts on like the bank failures and things like that. When I look at the bank failures, people are blaming this on deregulation. People are blaming this on the inability of financial institutions to regulate themselves. However, I think the issue at hand, when it really gets down to it, is more or less the problem of overproduction and the problem that we're living in the aftermath of a huge technological leap. And this huge technological leap is displacing a lot of workers. Workers can't afford to buy back the products that they produce. The room for workers at the assembly line is not what it once was. In addition to that, only human labor creates value. So when you eliminate human labor from the assembly line, the profits that the capitalists can extract also go down. And that we have a big financial problem. It's coming as a result of the profit system and the huge leaps in technology. And this is a classic crisis of overproduction, a classic crisis of the tendency of the falling rate of profit. And ultimately, it points to the need for a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government that will control the banks, factories, and industries and organize the economy to serve public good and not the profits of a few. That's how I look at all of this. And that the banking system ultimately should be organized by the state, and it should be organized to serve the interests of the public. We need a banking system where credit is strategically assigned for the good of the country to fulfill an overall economic vision. I think your organization talks about a national bank. You talk about Alexander Hamilton and all of that. That's how I look at all of this. What do you think?
Look, as far as these bank crises is, Lyndon LaRouche was talking about, I think, the moment that we're in right now for ever since 1971, he's been pointing out that, look, the economic system that we have today, it's not based on a sound system. It's not based on sound money. It's based on something that inevitably will collapse. And I think that we're seeing the collapse rapidly today. I mean, when you look at what's happening in East Palestine, when you look at what's happening all over the world, not just with Russia, not just with Taiwan, but all over the world, as far as in the resistance to this growing financial bubble and this octopus coming out of the West that has its hands on everything. This is going to collapse, and that's why things are getting worse and worse, and it's becoming more and more clear to more people, and that's why this kind of coalition that seems to be emerging of people speaking against the Russian-Ukraine war is coming out of all of these different kinds of apparatuses, such as the Center for Political Innovation, the LaRouche Organization, the Schiller Institute, the Libertarian Party, the People's Party. It's a reaction against the decline of the empire that we are seeing. And what I particularly like about you, Caleb, and what I especially love about the LaRouche Organization is when we start talking about solutions. What does the new paradigm actually look like? How do we deliver through a government of action? How do we actually deliver a new mode of production that puts people, puts humanity first, that develops the human mind, that develops the culture to be more beautiful, so that we could have a more beautiful society by, for, and through the people. And that's
Yeah,
what
well,
I'm attracted to.
yeah, a lot of the stuff that's out there, especially stuff that's calling itself socialist or communist, it doesn't really offer solutions other than burn it down, tear it down, and I mean, I see people who criticize me, and it's like one of the criticisms is like, oh, you want to leave the United States intact. You don't want to tear down this racist, settler, colonialist country. And it's like, well, I want a better life for the people here. And I don't think life is going to get better for people if we just burn the country to the ground. And I don't think it's going to get better for people if we just, I mean, the capitalists are already doing that. Look at East Palestine, look at the water that's not being purified. Look at the power plants that are falling apart. I mean, it's like the country's already falling apart. If we just wanted to tear this country apart further, that would put us in alliance with the elite. Our goal is to offer solutions to make people's lives better. And if we're going to be taken seriously politically, we have to present ways that we would make our lives better. I mean, and people generally vote for candidates who will try to make their lives better. And I don't hear any of that. So much of what passes for socialism or leftism is just this like people feel like they're very smart because they've discovered that America is racist or something. I feel like that makes them very smart. So they then point their finger at America and say, America is racist. America is racist. I want to destroy this country. It's like, well, good for you. Get your anger out, but that's not real politics. Real politics is like what Stalin did when he rapidly industrialized the USSR and made it an industrial superpower that could defeat the Nazis, that could invent space travel, that had the biggest power plants in the world, raising millions of people up. I mean, that's real politics. And I don't hear that coming from a lot of the voices. And that's why I get frustrated. And I think that's why I'm generally condemned by so much of the left, because I'm not just trying to destroy the country. I'm not in this to just get the cathartic release of burn it down, tear it down. I actually want a better country. And I think that socialism and moving away from the rule of profits and bankers is the way to do it. If we had an economy that was organized to serve public good and not the profits of wealthy few, we could make sure that people had jobs and housing and education. People were getting smarter, that we were, having technological breakthroughs. I think we could do all of that. But I really don't get it. It's like, if you put forward real solutions, and that's one thing I've looked to inspiration from the LaRouche group for a long time. I mean, many brilliant proposals have come from your organization about trains and high-speed railway, and about like aqueduct systems and all kinds of things. That's one thing I think your group has been very, very good at over the years, has been putting forward real policy solutions about how to rebuild America. And that's what we need more than anything right now. We need to rebuild the country.
And it's not just about the actual projects themselves either, right? What it really is too is by saying, when Kennedy said, "Hey, we're going to get to the moon," by setting society to that goal and having individuals work towards that goal together as a collective. I saw a study done that there's a $1 to $10 return, a $10 return per dollar spent on the moon mission.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an astronaut, the satellites, the way me and you are communicating right now, could be said to come from that space driver program. So it's important to realize that it's not just about shifting the mode of production. Also incurs a cultural change to where people are capable of making discoveries, of working productive jobs that allow their minds to become a part of what it is that they're working on.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think you were alluding to before this, this speculation, money that just comes from other money, where no real value gets created in the process. Karl Marx called it fictitious capital. It's this, this money that just comes from other money. And that's what so much of the economy we live in is now. I mean, Bitcoin, crypto, and and the derivative ripoffs that they had before the 2008 financial meltdown. And it's like there are all these mechanisms that capitalists have created where money comes out of other money, but no real value gets created. And I think Larouche, he talks about physical economy. I think that's the way he put it.
Yes.
Productive labor. I read, and that is being diminished, and instead we have this fake economy based on speculation, and a speculative bubble. In the end, after a while, you're just going to have a collapse because you're not creating real value. Human labor is the source of all wealth and all value. That's really when it gets down to it. And that's something that, that wasn't Karl Marx who first said that. Adam Smith said it before Karl Marx said it. And I believe there was one of the popes, he even said it as well, is that it is human labor that creates the wealth of the world. And it's, humans' ability to interact with their environment. And Frederick Engels, he said, the ability of human beings to force the environment to serve them and to reinvent their relationship with their environment. That is the source of wealth in the world. And that's something that I wish people could understand. You can't make money out of nothing. And much of the wealth that is being created in our Western capitalist economies right now is money made out of nothing. And eventually that's gonna fall apart. That's going to lead to a big collapse. And I think Larouche was warning the world about that back in the 1970s, and people didn't want to hear it. But he was right. He was absolutely right. And what he was saying was the same kind of thing that Marx was talking about when he talked about fictitious capital, the same kind of thing Lenin was talking about in his book Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, where he talked about how finance and bankers became dominant. I mean, this is a trend of the capitalist system. And as you impoverish people, as productivity decreases, as the actual physical economy gets smaller and weaker, eventually have a correction in the economy where the wealth and it all kind of comes down. That's my take on things.
Well, this is why I call myself Space Larouche, because I think space is such a neglected part. People, when you talk about space, people think that it's just a waste of money when we could be doing things on Earth. But I would love to see a space program that we could actually work together with Russia and China on. We could do mutual scientific research and development on. We could have a cultural exchange program where we exchange students, work with each other at each other's universities, and we actually launch a space program. There's helium-3 on the moon. Helium-3 isn't on Earth much because we have a magnetic sphere, so it bounces off of the Earth and lands on the moon. Now, helium-3, you could actually use it with nuclear energy. So just one ship to go to the moon and collect this, and China is actually working on seeing the feasibility of this. You could take helium-3 from the moon, bring it to Earth to power the Earth for the next 100 years. Imagine if we worked together with Russia and China on a kind of science driver project to reach Mars together, what we could accomplish. People are so worried about climate change. Imagine if we had a project to terraform Mars, or to learn how to terraform Mars, or to sustain life on the moon. I think if we could sustain life on the moon, we would be able to embrace any climate changes that seem to occur on Earth.
Yeah, and all these people that are so worried about the climate and they're just so concerned about it, why are they not really excited about what China's doing around fusion energy? Their only solution, it seems, is to reduce consumption. They're only interested in reducing consumption, making everyone
Because they're
poorer.
fascists. They're not actually interested in creating a government by and for the people. They're interested in creating anarchy. This is just undeniable. I mean, they're not interested in actually Promethean growth. They're angry at mom and dad. They think that if you make money, that makes you bad. And so the guy who owns a big rig truck, who owns his truck and makes money, he's greedy and a grubby guy because he's actually making money. No, if you're actually delivering value to people that keep society alive and thriving, those people need to be supported and appreciated because they're the reason that we're alive. So we need to support those kind of people, and we need to realize that the economy can only grow with the physical and scientific developments that we're talking about unleashing. That
Yeah,
these leftists and these environmentalists are actively pushing against.
Yeah, no,
So
you're
they're
absolutely right.
committing
And
a
I'm writing
genocide.
super chats down, by the way. But Shane is saying about China is watching Ukraine closely and how that will never be allowed to happen in Taiwan. And the big thing that's been in the news, the big thing that's been in the news lately is that China brought Saudi Arabia and Iran back together, right? That they negotiated a reconciliation, and now we understand that even though China is very much aligned with Russia, that there is going to be a phone call between Xi Jinping and Zelensky in Ukraine, and that some people are speculating maybe China may be able to negotiate a resolution conflict. And that would be really, really great if there could be, peace in Ukraine, if the conflict, if they could reach a point of agreement and a
Right.
ceasefire, that would be a great step forward. And that what China did with Saudi Arabia and Iran, that was a really, really big step forward. It was certainly a defeat for Israel, that was trying to unite the Arab world against Iran and polarize the Arab world against Iran. That was what Netanyahu wanted to do, and that's what Trump was working with Netanyahu around doing. That's what Trump was doing in his Middle East trip. But that's a really big step forward. But at the end of the day, China buys oil from both Saudi Arabia and Iran, and Saudi Arabia is trying to figure out what they're going to do now that they're not so vitally important to the United States because of fracking. And Saudi Arabia, they're studying what Lee Kuan Yew did, and they're thinking about having some kind of development programs to diversify their economy beyond just oil. So they're tapped into what China's doing. Iran is very closely tied in with China, with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And, there's a lot of very exciting. I was retweeting the supreme leader of Iran today, and he made some great statements today about infrastructure projects. Let me see what he said here. But the supreme leader of Iran was tweeting about China and infrastructure projects today. That's Khamenei, the leader of the Islamic Revolution. Let me pull up what he tweeted out today, because he usually tweets more religious kind of things or things directly related to Iran. But the supreme leader of Iran was tweeting about infrastructure and development. I will pull up those tweets. I'm scrolling down here to find those tweets here. It was very interesting to see what the supreme leader of Iran was tweeting out, but I think it's related to the deal that China brokered between the two countries. Let me just scroll down here and read what the supreme leader of Iran was tweeting out. At our last CPI conference, we made a point of having the supreme leader of Iran's latest book on the literature table, just as kind of a political statement. I think we had 2 copies of it, and we ended up selling at least one of them. But he wrote a book called 250-Year-Old Person. This is what the supreme leader of Iran tweeted out. The full launch of the North-South Transport Corridor will benefit Iran and Belarus, as well as Russia and the region. Both countries will work to make the corridor operational. That's what the supreme leader of Iran just tweeted out. Do you know about this project? This that he's referring to, this north, what is it called? This north-south transport corridor that Iran and Belarus and Russia are working on. That sounds very exciting, and I think that's related to the deal.
No, I don't. Thank you for bringing it to my attention, Caleb. It's exciting. I mean, it's amazing how on the one hand you have all these bank collapses here happening in the West, and then on the other hand you have more and more cooperation and plans for huge mega projects over on the other half of the world.
Yeah, before that, the supreme leader of Iran tweeted out, under the sanctions, Iran has been able to make enormous progress in different fields, including science and technology, the medical and biological sciences, space sciences, nuclear sciences, and nanotechnology. The harsh sanctions have enabled Iran to discover its domestic potential forces, and Iran has found many opportunities for progress during the past years while under sanctions. So he's basically saying that the sanctions are not going to wreck their economy. This is all really important. Oh, Kinky sent us a sticker, so thank you, Kinky.
Thank you.
So yeah, Kinky is out in California. Are you originally from California, right, or Arizona? Are you from California or Arizona? I can't remember which.
I'm from California.
You're from California. I thought you were from California. You said something about Arizona, but okay. What is your background? Like before you got, watching my streams and got involved with LaRouche or whatever, what is your background? What's your history?
Well, I got interested in politics at a young age because I could feel and see that the writing was on the wall, intuitively, that there was crazy things happening during my generation, that things were going to be very different and we were going to go through some political turmoil. And when I was young, I also was very attracted to a certain political movement that started when a man went down an escalator and told us that he was going to make America great again.
Wow.
Now, when that happened, I started working with, I volunteered for a local congressman. And then eventually I went to community college. And at community college, I started learning a lot about leftist type things, typical college experience, and I met lots of people from different backgrounds. I met some socialists and some communists, and I was able to live with a group of communists in Los Angeles for a few months.
Oh, wow.
From there, eventually I was working during the 2020 primary. Which kind of coincides with something we might talk about later with one of the books that you wrote on Kamala Harris. But I was preparing for Super Tuesday. And when I saw what happened on Super Tuesday, as far as in the blatant manipulation to get Joe Biden to be the nominee, that also coincided with the COVID occurrence happening all at once. I was on the ground talking to people about who were they planning on voting for, Bernie, what were their general thoughts, and I saw the manipulation happen first place when everyone dropped out at once and all supported Biden, and then they said after Biden won one race that there could be no more talk about any contest for the election because of COVID. And from there, I was like, the Democratic Party, Democratic Socialists, I was never too in on their woke things and some of their hardcore stances on some, coming from a Christian background, I was unattracted to a lot of that type of stuff. And then when I saw what happened there after another embarrassing situation with the 2016 Bernie campaign, which I also supported, even though I was a Trump supporter, I also liked Bernie Sanders quite a bit. And from then I was just disappointed, but I still wanted to listen to communists. And when I found you and I found Infrared, I was like, wow, these are people who actually, they want to make America great. They understand, they're not dumb PragerU people who are total frauds. They understand who are the people who are really responsible for what is happening and how can we develop solutions. And then when I discovered the LaRouche organization and some of the ideas that they have, particularly about science and how science and energy and development and the human mind and us being made in the image of God and how central that is to really understanding government and to really understand the economy, which you actually gave a great speech on yesterday, Caleb, I must say. You put it very beautifully yesterday in your Monday night chat where you
Thank you.
expressed a very similar sentiment. And so that's where I feel the heart of American politics is right now, is within this broader coalition of people who see and really do know that we are made in the image of God and that we are the most powerful beings in the universe as far as we are thus aware. And through labor and through scientific development and through music and culture, we can transform the world around us. In fact, we can transform the galaxy. And that is what government should be trying to unleash. And anyone who takes themselves seriously, calling themselves a communist, who isn't expressing something like that, is not a communist. They're exactly the type of anarchist or fascist we were speaking of earlier.
Yeah, well, in your speech at the Schiller Institute conference back in, was it September, I think, you quoted Che Guevara and his statement that revolutionaries are motivated by great feelings of love in your speech. And I have recently quoted that, and I quote that in the new book because I feel like people don't really understand what that means, right? But what he's getting at is that if you don't love the people, you can't be leading them. You can't expect them to follow you. You can't, come up with political solutions that are going to make their lives better. And that if it's not about love, if you cannot love the people in your community, the people in your neighborhood, the people in your state, the people in your country, if you don't love them, you really have no business in politics. And that unfortunately, this synthetic left that we talk about, you're talking about them being fascists, and you're absolutely right. They are not motivated by love. They do not love the country. They do not love the working class. They do not love the communities. They are motivated purely by anger and resentment and destructive impulses. It's interesting because you read my book on Kamala Harris, and just recently I saw, I don't know if people saw, but there is a big push now among Democrats for Kamala Harris to be dropped from the ticket in 2024. I mean, a lot of people think Biden shouldn't even run, but even among people that are supporting Biden, a lot of them are saying to drop Kamala Harris because she's less popular than Biden is. Biden is already quite unpopular. She's less popular than he is. And Elizabeth Warren was recently asked what she thought, and she gave like a vague answer. And now she's been forced to like grovel and apologize to Kamala Harris for basically vaguely hinting that, yeah, it'd be good if Biden would drop her from the ticket. And so it's this whole news story about how Elizabeth Warren has been calling the office of Kamala Harris to apologize, and they have not put her through to Kamala Harris to deliver her apology. But it's pretty wild. I mean, everything I wrote about Kamala Harris, I wrote it, before the election. My book was published in September. And there have been so many revelations since then that have confirmed everything I wrote about her personality, about how she treats her staff, about how people don't want to work with her, and that I wrote that book because I was approached by somebody who shall remain nameless, who knew her father. And he said, there's a story here. You've got to do something with this, Caleb. This is too big. The fact that her father is a communist, Marxist economist from Jamaica who was an advisor to Michael Manley, that she hates his guts, that he denounced her during the campaign, called her campaign a travesty of identity politics. This is really, really, really important stuff, to talk about. And it's weird because with Barack Obama, we knew everything. We knew about, his father from Kenya and his mother, and lived in Hawaii and went to a Muslim school. We knew all this stuff about Obama. Kamala Harris, it's just like, she was a lawyer in California, and she was a senator, and now she's vice president. Vote for her. Are you racist? Now vote for her. Yeah, I mean, that's the argument with Kamala Harris. No one wants to really talk about her roots and all of that. So in light of this most recent revelation that she may be dropped from the ticket, I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts on the book. I've never really gotten your full feedback on the book. What did you think of the book?
Well, it feeds into a lot of my thoughts that I already had given my interactions with people who know more about the Kamala Harris situation, given what I do know about Kamala Harris, and the strategic way in which they use people's trauma and people's ego, um, both on a broad basis across our culture, but also particularly in powerful people, to manipulate them into pursuing certain directions. And I think that becomes even clearer uh, when specifically focusing on Kamala Harris, Samantha Powers, and I know there was one other person who popped up in your book, but their name is escaping me.
Amy Klobuchar. Yeah, all three of them have basically the same life story of an abusive father. An abusive father. The mother and the father separate. They become estranged from the father. They hate the father. This is like, and it's weird, and it's very similar. And I talked about how, like, Obama and Bill Clinton had a very similar life story. Both
Yeah.
of them never knew their fathers. Both of them were raised by single mothers. Both of them kind of learned to cheer up their single mothers, and were kind of like, that's Bill Clinton and that's Obama. And George W. Bush and Trump, both of them had very high achieving fathers, and they were, they were one of different brothers, and they were the screw up brother who never really got things together. Trump was sent to military boarding school. Bush was, kicked out. It was a party boy who was, getting in trouble in school and was arrested for drunken behavior at football games, and was, barely finished college, and that they both then had something to prove. Being the screwed up son of a very high achieving father. Donald Trump's father was this very prominent real estate guy in New York City. George W. Bush, his father, had been the CIA director and eventually president, and that they had something to prove. And when people have something to prove, that makes them easy to manipulate. And that it's weird because, you can look at all of this and just say it's a coincidence, but it's not a coincidence, right? Because, the president of the United States has way more power and influence than like you or me does, right? I mean, they make decisions every day in which millions of dollars and millions of lives are on the line. And being able to push their buttons is really important. And, like one thing, after I published that book on Kamala Harris, people talked about how Ben Rhodes, who was Obama's advisor, foreign policy advisor, Ben Rhodes wrote a book basically saying similar things to what I said about how Ben Rhodes, Samantha Power, Cass Sunstein, they worked really hard at pushing Obama's buttons and manipulating him to go into Libya. Obama was reluctant to go into Libya because he didn't want to be Bush. He didn't want to invade a country and not have a plan to get out of it or whatever. He said his greatest regret of his presidency was going into Libya. And it took them days to work on Obama to convince him to send the military into Libya. And that they told Barack Obama that Gaddafi was saying that when he went to Benghazi, he was going to go house to house to get the terrorists that were trying to overthrow the government. And they told Barack Obama that house to house means he's going to massacre the whole city, and you're going to be remembered as the president who didn't stop it. And you have to remember, there's this whole narrative that Bill Clinton sat back and let a genocide happen in Rwanda, right? And that, you're going to be you're the first black president, you're an African president, but you let a massacre happen in an African country. They worked on him. They knew exactly how to push his buttons, and he finally relented, right? So knowing, how to manipulate, the emotions and the feelings of people that are in powerful positions, that's something that you can be sure that American intelligence and all of them work really, really hard at doing. And that what's scary is you want people in positions of power that are clear-headed, right? That make decisions, that can just very coldly calculate what's the best for the country. But we see the opposite. They actively seek out people that are unwell, right?
Yeah.
That are traumatized, that have pain, Obama and Bill Clinton both never knew their fathers. Both of them had abusive stepfathers who beat up their mothers. And it's like they seek out people that have trauma, that have pain, that have something to prove. And that's horrifying. That's not the kind of person you want with their finger on the nuclear button, but that's who they're seeking out, because they want people they can manipulate. The more damaged people are, the more history people have. And we all have history, right? We all have trauma. We all have pain in our past. That doesn't make someone a bad person. But the fact that they're actively seeking out people whom they can manipulate, that is terrifying, right? We should want people that are able to be clear-headed and make the most calculated decision.
Of course. And that's why it's so important that people often joke about my organization and the fact that they teach about classical music, and they talk about reading the classics and actually having an understanding of, the Western tradition of the culture, and reading Plato, for instance. Reading Gorgias was so helpful for me. And we need people who really actually are thinking things through on the level of knowing what it actually means to know something. What is love? Like you talked about earlier, loving people. Well, it's going to be hard to love other people if you don't even know what love is. It's going to be hard to pursue truth and to pursue justice if you can't even be sure that such things actually exist. And what Larouche pointed out was that there was a movement within the United States, and you've pointed this out too, the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And what was their exact goal? To destroy any sense that Americans could have of what it actually means to pursue truth. What is truth? To destroy that, to destroy what it means to have justice, to destroy what it is to actually pursue science. And that's why you see things are so willy-nilly and backwards today, like with the extreme examples that you see in the culture war today of just
Well,
obvious derailment of our minds from actually thinking about what is the solutions and what is it that we can actually accomplish as humans, into just the pothole of just potty and just thinking about the most animalistic parts of ourselves.
no, one thing I got to tell you, when you talk about the Congress for Cultural Freedom, it just drives me up the wall that you get these people. There are a number of them on the internet who just say that's not true. That's a Larouchian conspiracy theory that never happened. It's like, no, it happened. Like this is a very widely circulated book, Finks, How the CIA Tricked the World's Best Writers. And you can read it. Joel Whitney talks about the Congress for Cultural Freedom, how it was founded in West Berlin, how Irving Kristol was the leader of it, how they, that's one book that describes it. This is another book called Who Paid the Piper? The CIA and the Cultural Cold War by Francis Stone Saunders. Another book, an academic book, goes into great detail about how the CIA manipulated these writers, manipulated reinvented leftism, funded Trotskyites, funded, what they call modern art and all kinds of stuff. This is
Well, and Caleb, look who came out of this. You could pull up your book right now, Kamala Harris, because Kamala Harris was directly raised in those circles, that exactly what we're talking about with the rainbow. What was the name of
Rainbow Sign. Yeah. And this is a book about Charles Manson. But yeah, in my book, I talked about how, when she was a child, there was a cultural center in San Francisco that she attended, in Oakland. And it was called Rainbow Sign. And it was actually, it was funded by an African-American writer he's actually talked about extensively in Joel Whitney's book, How the CIA Tricked the World's Greatest Writers. And it was founded by a CIA asset, African-American writer, who set up this cultural center. And that's where Kamala Harris spent her childhood with her sisters, as they went to this cultural center in Oakland that was basically a CIA, place. It was basically being funded by the CIA, run by the CIA, as an alternative to Black nationalism and communism and revolutionary stuff, which was very big in Oakland at the time. There was this kind of vaguely African, kind of like what they're doing now with BLM, this kind of woke cultural center where she went with her sisters, that was pretty clearly some kind of CIA government operation to counter the rise of communism in the Black community. And that's where she got her training. And she sang in plays that they put on there, and she went to workshops, and yes, you're right about that. And I talk about that, and she talks about that in her autobiography. She talks about that. I mean, she's very open about that in her autobiography, the fact that she went there. Oh, but there's a question for you. John McCarthy says, Space, can you talk a little bit about the classes that Nick Brana and Jose Vega will be starting on how to do interventions? There you go. Go ahead. I don't know about this, so go ahead.
Sure. So Jose Vega has been doing an excellent job at showing up to interventions across the New York area. Jose actually lives in what is the poorest district in all of the United States, represented by a young man who is not a very, he's one of these so-called progressive Democrats, but he's been supporting this war in Ukraine, and he's not been answering questions on actually trying to, maybe do what China called for with their pointed plan of peace, and what Helga has been talking about with their 10 principles. They're not answering us on this. And so what we've been doing is interventions, talking at town hall events across the United States and saying, hey, we're not going to survive as a country if no nations want to do business with us because they think we're going to blow up their pipelines like we did with Germany.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to work together with other nations if you can apparently pull terrorist acts on them and just get away with it? So Jose has been killing it, and we've been having people we've been inspiring people across the nation, frankly, to do more interventions, and I encourage people to do that. I'm actually talking Jose. Little known fact about Jose is that he's actually quite adept at computer science, and we have other people who we know who are good at computer science. And we're working on an app that could potentially scan the emails of different senators and congressmen who send out their emails every day and see when they're holding events and put all of that on a map so that we can organize together with the People's Party, with the Libertarian Party, with the LaRouche organization, with CPI to oh, there's a town hall event coming up in the Minnesota 3rd District. Let's call up all of our contacts and see that we could actually make sure that we could get some people there to do an intervention. And so what Jose is going to be doing soon is he's going to be holding a class where he's going to be teaching people how to actually do interventions. So signing up for your congressman and senator's email list, preparing yourself. You don't also just have to yell. We did one intervention very recently on AOC that didn't go quite as viral as some of the stuff that Jose has been doing. But we sung an old Latin song called Dona Nobis Pacem, or Give Us Peace. And it was interesting because it's different from just yelling. And at first people didn't know what was going on, but we were also holding these signs that said, fight for, let's have peace with Russia. Yeah. And while we were singing this beautiful Latin classical music, and it was very, people who actually went to that meeting and support AOC, they told us, hey, that was actually quite moving that you guys did that. So we're hoping to start thinking of doing interesting satirical type interventions. Our organization has gone very viral in the past, for instance, with a lady in our organization at an AOC event years and years ago. Trump retweeted this, where she was like, you must eat the babies to save the planet. Eat the babies. We have to kill the babies. So there's lots of ways that we can make our voices heard. And actually it's not just about making your voice heard, but it's also about kind of having a Socratic moment with the people and with the Congress. When you could do things satirically, or you could say things in a powerful way, you could have a huge impact. People these days, they say, well, there's nothing I could do about this Russia-Ukraine war. But I'm here to tell you, and what Jose has done shows you, that you can have a huge impact. And you could do that because of the beauty and power of your mind. So that is what Jose is going to be really reflecting on and trying to teach to people, and you're welcome to join it. I don't know exactly when that's scheduled for, but anyone who is interested in that, you're free to follow me on Twitter and shoot me a direct message, or follow and give a direct message to Jose. But I'm happy to help people with that. And I heard that the CPI is even interested in doing some intervention soon.
We are interested, and we have members of our organization who would like to be part of those trainings and workshops. So be sure to let us know when those trainings are, because we would like to be in on that as well. We have done some interventions in the past, and we'd like to do more of them. Yeah, well, I'm thinking about what's going on in the world right now, and how it seems like the Biden administration is pushing more and more hostility to China. It was the weather balloon nonsense. Remember that? Who can forget that, right? The balloon apocalypse, right? There was a balloon, and there was that, and then now they're trying to say that China somehow is responsible for COVID, when they're not even sure that it came from this lab, and this lab was fully paid for by the United States, and Dr. Fauci was involved in it. There's just so many. So yeah, someone is saying, I heard that Dylan Burns ran from a debate with Liam at Rage Against the War Machine. Did that happen? What's this about? I don't know about this. Tell me what's the story here.
Well, I did get to meet Dylan Burns at the Rage Against the War Machine rally. For people who don't know, maybe Dylan Burns, I don't know how he blew up, but he's a very pro-Ukrainian guy, I don't want to demean him, but he's an interesting fella. You know, he told me when I met him that he's looking forward to going to Amsterdam to do magic mushrooms right before he goes into Ukraine to do war footage. And
Hmm.
that really struck me. I was like, wow, mushrooms before war, huh? That's interesting. Anyway,
Worked for the
uh,
Vikings.
he's a big fan of Ukraine. He poses himself kind of as a socialist, but not really. I mean, he really doesn't know anything about socialism,
Hmm.
but he criticizes slightly the Biden administration while being one of their biggest cheerleaders for their foreign affairs. So I met Dylan Burns here, and it was funny because online he's a very vicious and nasty person, but in person he's not really about that smoke. And I'm not really a very aggressive person either. So I
Hmm.
just kind of approached him and started asking him some questions about the war. And I actually was able to film it. And I just haven't gotten to putting it up. I could put it up, and then I'm also planning on maybe doing a. I got his contact information. Maybe I might debate him soon with Simon Miller.
Well, good for you. I hope you do that. That would be a productive thing to do. I mean, engaging these people can sometimes be good. I mean, don't expect to change their minds, but some people in their audience might, be interested in what you have to say. But no, when I said it worked for the Vikings, I was actually referencing where the term berserk came from. When you ever hear someone went berserk, that referred to certain Viking warriors that would take hallucinogens before they went into battle. They would eat hallucinogenic mushrooms before they went into battle, and they would act crazy. And they were called the berserkers. And that's where the phrase go berserk actually comes from. It comes from
Hmm.
so I guess there's a tradition of people going to Norway and taking magic mushrooms before they go to war. But there you go. I just that's what immediately came to mind. But it's wild. It's wild. I will say one thing that as far as the whole thing, they're pushing now. Everybody, if you're suffering from mental illness, they're pushing people to use hallucinogens as if that's going to be a cure. And I think there might be some rare instances where it's like someone has trauma and so they take a hallucinogen and it helps them remember it in a different way. And maybe there's something, but the way they're pushing them now is insane. I mean, they're pushing them. It's like, oh, you're depressed. What you need to do is go do some hallucinogens. Oh, you're feeling anxiety. Go take some hallucinogens. And it's really scary, honestly. I mean, it's a full court. I mean, the news media is pushing it, and so many news stories and so many ads, and it's
Certainly.
really disturbing. I mean, I think if someone is having psychological problems, the last thing they need, for the most part, I mean, I'm not a doctor, okay, but the last thing they need for the most part is a drug that's going to cause them to see things that are not there, to lose touch with their senses. I mean, it just can't be good for people. What do you think?
Well, I'm a pretty young man. I'm around 23 years old, and I come from California. And I don't know about the rest of the United States, but in California, among the young people, it's really been pushed on, and
Mm.
most of the young people I know have definitely had experiences with hallucinogenic drugs, and I have seen firsthand young people who take these drugs, and they claim that it makes them feel a lot better, and that they're much more in touch with different things, and God or something like that. And I don't know, but I do know that there's a lot of people who um, they go into kind of a spiral
Mm.
where they kind of lose a little bit of touch with reality. And I've seen that firsthand with a couple of people. And like you said, especially when people are dealing with mental illnesses or with trauma, it could be very dangerous. And then I also saw an article years back that the British were discussing developing novel psychedelic compounds, as well as developing other military solutions to give to soldiers that would enable them to not question any of the
Mm.
orders that were given to them, and to be more ruthless and to not have to sleep and things of that nature. And within that article, they said, oh, well, the Chinese and the Russians, they're evil. So, of course, they're going to be building this stuff. So that means we have to build it
Mm.
so that we can respond to when the Russians and the Chinese do it. And from that day, I've also been seeing that now on the stock market, there are stocks that are developing new novel psychedelic compounds that are supposedly going to be used to treat depression, but are also being investigated into by the military industrial complex that might end up being used to those purposes. So, meanwhile, you have young black males being thrown in jail
Mm.
for trading the drugs that the CIA and the intelligence operations are bringing into the country, but yet you can openly invest on the stock market into companies that are creating psychedelic compounds to give the soldiers so that they ruthlessly kill people. What a joke.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the more you read about like Project MK Ultra, and I think there's that book, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, and all of that. That was some really evil stuff the government was doing back then. I mean, you read about Timothy Leary and that whole LSD cult or whatever, the League of Spiritual Discovery, and it was basically a government-sponsored operation to get as many people to fry their brains on drugs as possible. I mean, they were just distributing LSD everywhere. They had these huge open air concerts where there'd be free drugs just given out to everybody. And you look at how many people got badly hurt by that. I mean, it was a lot of people. And it shows they don't really care about the domestic population,
Well, you can see that there are stories that hippies will even tell each other of at Grateful Dead concerts, a plane flying over top of them and then opening up and dropping a very specific type of LSD that they called like electric sunshine or something like that, that they're just raining on top. I mean, how is that organized? See, what people don't realize is that, well, look what's happening in El Salvador right now.
Mm-hmm.
The state doesn't want crime. Guess what happens? No more crime. What Bukele has done is now you have a record low a murder rate in a country where there used to be a murder every single day. It was one of the highest murder rates in the entire world. Look, if you don't want crime, the government can stop crime.
Mm-hmm.
This is the reason why we have crime, the reason why we have drugs, and the reason why the cartel is so crazy in Mexico. We have Republicans talking about invading the cartel. We create the cartel.
Yeah.
We're the ones running this. If they wanted that to stop, they could stop it.
Yeah. No, one great thing that we published, the Center for Political Innovation, we published this volume, Fidel Castro Exposes the Synthetic Left. And this is a compilation of some of the articles Fidel Castro wrote after he retired. He had this like daily column in Granma, the Cuban like daily newspaper. And one of the first articles we quote in here is him exposing Project MK Ultra. And, Cuba has some of the strictest drug laws of any country in the world. I mean, if you ever go to Cuba, I was a leftist. I never actually went, but I was being trained to go to Cuba. And I remember that was one thing they made clear, it's a room full of leftists with long hair and, and counter. They're like, do not bring marijuana here. Do not bring any drugs here. If you do, you'll be staying here for a couple years in prison. They made that abundantly clear. Cuba is really not a drug using country. And in one of his columns that we have in here, it's called The World Government. And it's like a 2-part column. He goes into great detail about how, LSD was very much used to, try to control and weaken the anti-Vietnam War protest movement, how it was used to weaken the civil rights movement. And he goes into great detail talking about it, about Project MK Ultra and all this. This is Fidel Castro. If anyone's got communist credentials, it's this guy. So there you go. The guy ahead of MK Ultra was maybe a serial killer. What does that mean? Ahead of MK Ultra? Are you talking about I know this is one of the books on MK Ultra, the Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA and the search for mind control. Is this what you're talking about? Sidney Gottlieb? He was the guy who was running the MK Ultra program. This is a book by Stephen Kinzer that came out a couple years ago about Sidney Gottlieb and the MK Ultra program. It's a wild story about the evil things they were doing to the population. And it really goes to show, they always attack these countries and they say, oh, well, we're trying to keep us safe. We're trying to keep us safe. The government is trying to keep us safe. And it's like, oh, we're invading, invaded Afghanistan because of 9/11. We just got to keep everyone safe. And, the reason they're reading all our phone calls and emails, they just want to keep us safe. And it's like, they don't want to keep us safe. They really don't. I mean, if they're distributing drugs the way they are, if they're, driving so much instability, openly talking about reducing the population, they're not interested in keeping us safe by any means. They see the population as an annoying horde that must be managed. And I think our responsibility as revolutionaries is to see the population as the opposite, as full of potential.
Yes.
These are people that could become engineers and scientists. These are people
Mm-hmm.
that could become a source of a whole renaissance here on the American continent, right? And we have a government that kind of just wishes the population would go away so they can collapse the United States into their global financial system, as kind of just, Southern California and New York City as trading hubs in their global financial empire. We have to see the United States as a huge swath of land and a population and natural resources that could be made into a productive place. I think that with China teaming up with the United States, with Russia teaming up with the United States, we could build like an amazing high-tech country. We really, really could. But we would have to have the view that growth is good. We'd have to have a leadership that understood that growth is good and that it was in the interest of humanity to soar to new heights. That's kind of my view.
100%. And this is where, Trump, he says we got to take a quantum leap. And he's, of course, made the famous saying, make America great again. But you're not going to be able to do that without working together with Russia and China, without working together with other nations. And you can look and see what China has been doing all over the world. I recently wrote an article on one Belt and Road project, the East African crude oil pipeline. Now, of course, you have all these environmentalists who are saying that, oh, this is such a bad project. But then you look, China's national offshore oil company, it has a 28% stake. They're majorly invested in building a state-of-the-art science laboratory at Makerere University. They're exchanging students to the Chinese Petroleum University and other universities. I mean, this is a science driver program, and we're talking about the country with the youngest population in the world, Uganda. We're talking about a country where 80% of people have to go and chop wood to be able to heat their home, to be able to cook their food. I mean, why is it that the West thinks that they should be able to tell those people, hey, you can't have a petroleum industry, you can't have energy, go chop down that wood to survive?
Yeah.
That is what I like to call green colonialism, because you're restricting these people from actually developing and being able to have sovereignty and not to be dependent on primarily Western countries, by telling them that they're going to pollute the environment just by actually moving forward in their mode of production.
Absolutely. No, you couldn't be more right. And I think that, understanding that LaRouche put forward, that right now the fight is between those who believe in economic growth and those that are trying to save capitalism by degrowing. That's really, I mean, he hit the nail on the head. And it's become more true in the aftermath of his life than it was when he first started commenting that way. I think back in the 1970s, he was kind of an outlier among Marxists because he was saying, well, actually, the main danger are the Eastern establishment or the liberals, where most of the left was focusing on the military industrial complex because of the Vietnam War, and there we go. I think LaRouche, we now see the results of that cultural revolution, they called it, that the 60s radicals brought on, and how it's made the population more easy to control, more easy to manipulate. It's led to neoliberal economics and impoverishment of the population. He was right in many, many ways. And he was very tuned into certain trends in culture and in society. And then he also wrote a book, Earth's Next 50 Years. I think it was one of the last books he wrote before he died, that there's a chapter called The Eurasian Future. where he basically, it's just like 2004. He's predicting that Russia and China and the Belt and Road Initiative, all of this, none of this had really come into fruition, but he lays it all out in there. And that's why I encourage people to read LaRouche's writings. I mean, there's so much there. Sometimes it can be a little bit, it can be a little bit hard. You have to kind of sift through it to find the specific points he's making. It's not exactly as clear and laid out as some of us would like, but the ideas that are there are very profound. And that's why I encourage people to read LaRouche. I have volume 1. I was actually really disappointed. I bought volume 1 of Lyndon LaRouche's, of his collected works. And I was disappointed because I already had every single book in there. So I'm waiting for volume 2 to come out because hopefully it'll have some stuff I don't have. So there you go.
Volume 2 will be coming out, and it will have some never before published things that were within the organization, private things that he said within the organization. So that'll be interesting, some never before seen things. And I want to push back that he is clear. It's just that he points out so many, and he'll name drop so many different things and take all of these different concepts, especially these scientific concepts, to where, at least with me, I'll be like, oh, I need to Google that real fast, or I need to read that book, or I need to read that book before moving on. And that can be tough, but making, one thing that we like to say within our organization is that with a lot of these famous authors or these great statesmen or philosophers like Lyndon LaRouche, like a Plato, like Alexander Hamilton, like Frederick Schiller, really reading them and going through them, studying their ideas, it's almost like you're making a friend, a new friend for life that you can have a dialogue with through their ideas within their books. And that's why, I'm very glad to be a friend with you, Caleb, because of the Marxists, especially in the West and within the United States, you are pushing forward beating back what has been done to the United States for years and years and years by the Congress for Cultural Freedom, by the New Left, by these crazy, anarchists, really. I don't even want to call them socialists, even though that's what they call themselves, because they are anarchists. And what you have done by bringing back a sort of a Promethean Marxism and talking about how people are made in the image of God, and we need to bring that, we need a state that brings that out of people, that brings that higher quality, that beauty that it resides within people out. That is what is necessary for today's movement. That is what is necessary for today's America. And that's how we're going to make America great again.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Liam. Where, other than your Twitter, which is Space Larouche, your handle is just Space Larouche, where can people else can they find your work? Is there another place they can learn more about you?
Sure. Well, I would really appreciate if anyone interested in knowing more about the LaRouche organization would check out the Executive Intelligence Review. I write articles in there occasionally. I know Caleb is a frequent reader of our daily briefings. We have had a team going at it for 40, 50 years, doing direct counterintelligence analysis, discussions of the solutions, and even scientific work that is within our magazine. So that briefing is what I use. I know it's what Jackson Hinkle, for instance, likes to read, the Executive Intelligence Review. And if you guys would support us by becoming readers of the Executive Intelligence Review, I think it would be very fruitful for you.
Well, very good. Well, thank you for coming on, Liam. It was a great chat, great conversation. We'll have you back sometime. Good luck. Good luck with everything.
Caleb. I appreciate you. Have a nice night.
Yeah, very